Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the details of Nepal's economy, looking at the business side of things, especially projecting out from 2025 to 2030.
Yeah, and for this, we're drawing heavily on a pretty detailed analysis that focuses right in on Nepal, particularly the Kathmandu Valley, which is, well, central to everything. We've really tried to pull out the key takeaways from that source material.
And it paints quite a complex picture, doesn't it? The report suggests recovery is happening, but it's definitely not simple. There are some bright spots, for sure, but also some really significant hurdles.
Exactly. So our aim here is to unpack that analysis for you, pinpoint the core insights, where the real potential seems to be according to the data, but just as importantly, be really clear about the obstacles, the things businesses or investors absolutely need to be aware of.
Getting to the heart of it.
That's the idea, the practical side of this economic story.
Okay, let's dive in then. The big picture forecast, what's it telling us for the next few years?
All right, so the numbers in the analysis point towards a, let's say, gradual recovery. For the current fiscal year, FY 2025, the projection is somewhere between 4.0% and 4.6% GDP growth.
Okay.
And looking a bit further out, FY 26, FY 27, that's forecast to pick up pace, maybe averaging around 5.4% per year, though it's worth mentioning the government's own target for FY 25 is a bit higher, aiming for 6%.
Right, 5.4% average medium term. That sounds, well, reasonably positive on the surface. What's actually fueling that upward trend according to the analysis?
Several things seem to be contributing. There's a noticeable pickup in domestic demand. The services sector is definitely growing, especially tourism, which is bouncing back. We're also seeing more electricity coming online from hydropower projects, which helps. And agriculture has seen some improvement too, mainly thanks to better monsoons recently.
But you mentioned hurdles, and the report really emphasizes the fragility of this recovery. Where is that coming from?
A lot of it boils down to external factors, things outside Nepal's immediate control. The economy is still very reliant on, for example, migrant remittances.
Yeah.
Absolutely crucial.
Right.
And stable world prices for imports are also key. Now, the remittances are still huge, but the report flags that their growth rate is actually slowing down. That's a potential risk.
Okay, so external dependencies. What about the challenges inside Nepal?
There are some persistent, significant ones. Infrastructure is a big one, major deficits in energy, transport, even digital connectivity. They just haven't kept pace.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
Then there's this gap everyone talks about between government plans, which can be quite ambitious, and what actually gets implemented on the ground. Bureaucracy is another constant friction point for businesses. And the financial sector isn't without risk either. Non-performing loans, NPLs, have been rising. The data showed them around 4.9% in the first half of FY 25, which is quite high. And despite policies trying to attract it, foreign direct investment, FDI, it just stays remarkably low. Plus, the underlying political instability adds uncertainty. It affects confidence, policy consistency, the whole environment, really.
The analysis touched on inflation, too. Is that still a major worry?
Well, the overall inflation rate seems to be slowing down a bit, which is good news. However, the report does highlight that food inflation is still a concern. Certain items, vegetables for instance, saw prices jump around 7.5% in the first half of FY 25.
Ouch.
And because the Nepali rupee is pegged to the Indian rupee, what happens with inflation in India tends to spill over significantly. It's sort of baked in.
Okay, let's pivot to something the analysis really zooms in on. Kathmandu. It sounds like it's basically the center of the universe, economically speaking, for Nepal.
It really is, and the numbers confirm it. The Kathmandu Valley isn't just the capital city, it's the absolute economic engine. It generates a massive slice of the national GDP. The estimates in the report put it somewhere between, say, 23.4% and 30%.
A quarter to almost a third of the whole economy.
Exactly. This is where most major business activity is concentrated, especially services, trade, you name it.
And that's driven largely by people moving into the valley, right? Urbanization.
Precisely. This rapid urbanization, fueled by internal migration from rural areas, creates this intense demand for, well, everything. Housing, commercial property, goods, services. The demand is just incredibly high.
But that kind of explosive growth must put enormous strain on the city's infrastructure.
Huge strain. Yeah. The analysis is very clear on this. When growth happens this fast, often without enough planning, it just overwhelms existing systems. Transport gets gridlocked, utilities like power and water are stretched thin, waste management becomes a massive problem, the environment takes a hit.
So it makes existing problems worse.
Significantly worse, yes.
So Kathmandu is the main market, the hub for IT, finance, tourism, and even where the startup scene is bubbling up.
That's the picture. It's the primary market consumers look to. It's where those higher value service industries congregate. It's where new tech ventures are trying to get started. And it's the main transport nexus, obviously, with the International Airport, TIA. Although the report does note that the recent modernization work there caused quite a bit of temporary disruption.
Given all that concentration, what does Kathmandu's situation mean for Nepal as a whole?
It means that tackling the specific bottlenecks within Kathmandu is fundamental to unlocking the country's wider potential. Things like the traffic congestion, the power reliability issues, the kind of chaotic urban sprawl, the slow progress on big projects like a potential metro system. Solving these here is absolutely key.
So businesses targeting Nepal need to grapple with Kathmandu's specific issues.
They absolutely have to factor in those operational challenges. But look, the flip side is, if you can find solutions that work in Kathmandu's complex environment, maybe, just maybe, those solutions could offer models that might be scalable elsewhere in the country.
Let's dig into those bigger factors the analysis identifies. Remittances came up early, sounds like a double-edged sword.
It really is. On one hand, they're undeniably a lifeline. Money sent home by workers abroad. It's projected to be something like 25.89% of GDP in FY25. That's massive.
You.
It fuels consumption, provides essential foreign currency, helps reduce poverty, but the risks are there. As we said, growth is slowing. The report mentioned it dropped from 18.3% year-on-year growth to 9.4% in the first 8 months of FY25. And the total amount can fluctuate depending on economies elsewhere.
So while they prop things up, they might also be masking deeper problems.
That's exactly the concern raised in the analysis. Relying so heavily on remittances can hide underlying weaknesses, like not enough jobs being created within Nepal, or the fact that Nepal doesn't export very much. It also means people tend to spend rather than save. The domestic savings rate is really low, mentioned at 6.55% of income. And all that cash pouring in can potentially fuel inflation.
Does the government try to channel that money into investment?
There are stated aims, yes, trying to encourage investment into productive sectors like hydropower. But actually making that happen effectively, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
The opportunities identified, though, are things like financial services designed specifically for migrants and their families, or investment products directly linked to those remittance flows.
Okay. Tourism, another major factor. It seems to be recovering well.
Yes, the potential there is definitely strong. They got about 1.15 million tourists in 2024, which is almost back to pre-pandemic levels, 96% of 2019 numbers. And people are staying longer on average, which is good.
But still vulnerable.
Still vulnerable. Infrastructure issues, like the TIA disruption showed, can really hurt. Global economic conditions obviously play a role. And the analysis suggests Nepal really needs to diversify its tourism products beyond just trekking and climbing.
What about foreign aid and foreign direct investment, FDI?
Well, Nepal still relies quite a bit on foreign aid and concessional loans for funding development projects and the government budget. The potential risk flagged in the report is that global geopolitical shifts could potentially reduce those aid flows over time.
And FDI?
So low.
Extremely low historically, just a tiny fraction of GDP, like 0.1, 0.2%. Now, recently, there's been an uptick in declared commitments. The analysis mentioned around U.S. $430 million announced in the first 9 months of FY25, often for smaller businesses. But the key point is that actual money flowing in consistently lags way behind those initial announcements.
Why is that? Is it the political environment? The government says it wants to support the private sector?
They do say that, yes. And there are reforms aimed at improving the investment climate. The private sector drives something like 81% of the economy, so it's crucial. But the report points to ongoing issues. Political instability creates uncertainty. There's that persistent gap between policy promises and actual implementation, and businesses often feel there isn't enough real consultation. These things tend to undermine confidence. Beyond those specific points, what about deeper structural weaknesses holding things back?
The analysis highlights several recurring problems. Low labor productivity is one. Declining competitiveness in exports, apart from a few specific items maybe. A real risk of the manufacturing sector shrinking or stagnating deindustrialization, the infrastructure gaps we keep coming back to, and this persistent brain drain, skilled people, including lots of IT specialists, leaving for opportunities elsewhere. It's a major drag.
Right. So that dependence on remittances is a lifeline, but it covers up some fundamental issues, and the gap between policy talk and action is a constant theme.
That sums it up well. Investors really need to look past the headlines and announcements and assess the likelihood of real change on the ground.
Okay, let's switch gears and get into specific sectors. Based on the analysis, where are the opportunities and what's the ground reality? Agriculture first.
Agriculture is still huge, around 25% of GDP, employs a lot of people. But growth is fairly modest, projected about 3.2% for FY25. It's mostly small-scale, subsistence farming, very weather-dependent. The government talks about a decade of investment to modernize it.
And linking that to Kathmandu's big market, what opportunities stand out there in agribusiness?
The real potential identified is bridging that gap, getting food from rural farms to urban consumers more efficiently. So high-value products, organics, processed foods, niche items for city dwellers, agro-processing to add value before selling. Ag tech is key technology to boost farm efficiency, improve market access, strengthen supply chains, build climate resilience, even things like urban farming, hydroponics, and critically, improving cold storage and logistics. That's a major bottleneck causing huge waste right now.
Got it. Now, industry, the report suggested this sector is smaller, maybe struggling a bit.
That's generally the case. Industry is only about 13.7% of GDP, and manufacturing is a small part of that, even facing that deindustrialization risk. What growth there is seems mainly driven by electricity generation, hydropower, and construction.
Hydropower that's always touted as Nepal's big potential, right?
Absolutely immense potential. The viable capacity is estimated over 42,000 megawatts. Big projects are underway, and it's seen as a key for future growth and exports, especially with the target of selling 10,000 milliW to India. But it needs massive investment, and there are significant financial and regulatory hurdles, plus reliance on India for the export infrastructure itself.
Here's the paradox, though, right? Huge hydro potential, but the analysis says businesses still face power outages. How does that work?
Yes, this is probably the most critical operational issue for many industries. The potential is there, but the current reality is often unreliable power. Manufacturing can still get hit with outages. Imports from India have helped, especially at night recently. But the domestic grid struggles with dry season dips and maintenance issues.
So it hits productivity, adds costs for backup generators.
Exactly. So while building new hydro plants is a big investment opportunity, ensuring the reliability of the whole grid is crucial for every other industry.
So opportunities aren't just in building dams, but fixing the grid, too.
Precisely. Services around grid stability, energy efficiency for businesses, promoting solar, building EV charging infrastructure, these are all linked. Beyond energy, the report points to opportunities in construction materials and tech, supporting that sector's recovery. And maybe niche manufacturing, where Nepal has an advantage, cement, pharma, footwear, food processing, textiles focusing on replacing imports or targeted exports.
Okay, but the services sector is really the main engine, isn't it?
Yes, it's the biggest part of the economy, around 62% of GDP, and where most of the recent growth has come from. It's quite diverse, too.
Let's revisit tourism within that.
Yeah, tourism's definitely showing strong signs of recovery. Nearly back to 2019 visitor numbers in 2024, people staying longer. The TIA airport upgrade, once fully done, should help capacity, though it caused disruption. The government's pushing diversification, cultural tours, wellness, MIC events, not just mountains, promoting new areas, sustainability.
Opportunities there seem pretty clear then.
Leveraging that eventual TIA capacity increase is one. Developing those niche tour packages, cultural immersion, wellness retreats, conference services, catering to digital nomads, maybe more luxury offerings. Using tech apps, platforms is another angle. And there's a need for better hospitality training. Plus, as the TIA issue showed, opportunities exist in fixing infrastructure bottlenecks, better ground transport from the airport, maybe developing regional airports.
IT and the digital economy, the analysis sounded really bullish on this.
It's definitely a high-growth area and a major government priority. They have ambitious targets, becoming an IT hub, boosting exports massively, creating jobs. There's a good pool of tech graduates, around 50,000 a year apparently.
Software development.
BPO, digital payments, e-commerce are all growing fast. Policy supports digital infrastructure, 5G plans, data centers, AI, e-government incentives.
But what are the real challenges holding IT back, according to the report?
Despite the ambition, yeah, there are hurdles. Keeping skills up to date is one. Global competition is intense. And critically, those infrastructure gaps, again, reliable power is essential for IT, and high-speed internet outside Kathmandu can be patchy. 5G rollout has been delayed compared to neighbors, and that brain drain problem hits IT hard-skilled specialists leaving.
So, navigating those challenges, where's the sweet spot for opportunity?
The analysis suggests strong potential remains in software development and IT outsourcing, playing into Nepal's cost and talent advantages for clients abroad. Fintech is booming. Payments are already big. Think online lending, insurtech, blockchain uses. E-commerce needs better logistics to really take off. EdTech, health tech, ag tech applying IT to other sectors. digital marketing, cybersecurity, data centers, and cloud services are needed. But the big picture is this vision of an IT hub versus the reality of infrastructure limits and losing talent. So the best immediate opportunities are probably leveraging current strengths, software, BPO, while also focusing on building the supporting infrastructure and finding ways to retain talent. That's crucial for moving up the value chain.
Okay. Real estate and urban infrastructure, particularly in Kathmandu, sounds like a pressure cooker of demand.
It really is. Urbanization plus remittance money has fueled massive demand for property, both residential and commercial. Prices are high, creating affordability issues. Trends noted include a move towards more affordable housing further out in the suburbs, growth in commercial spaces, more interest in green buildings, and the rise of property technology.
And the bottlenecks. What makes it difficult?
Bureaucracy is a big one. Permits, land registration, unclear processes. The high prices themselves are a barrier. Getting financing can be tough. Lack of transparency in deals, and policy uncertainty, like rules around foreign ownership.
So where are the opportunities in that kind of market?
The sheer demand creates openings. Developing affordable housing projects in those expanding suburban areas seems key. Commercial real estate offices, shops, warehouses is needed if business activity grows. Hotels benefit from tourism's return. Sustainable building is a growing niche, and PropTech solutions that can make buying, selling, or managing property easier or more transparent have potential. Success likely involves navigating land issues and maybe partnerships, especially for larger affordable housing developments.
Financial services, you mentioned rising NPLs, non-performing loans earlier.
Yes, the report highlights that as a key concern. The central bank has been generally supportive, but NPLs hit record levels for Nepal around 4.9%. That puts pressure on banks. Measures are being taken, but it signals stress among borrowers. On the plus side, digital payments are really taking off, including cross-border links like with India's UPI. Policy is pushing digital banking, financial inclusion.
So opportunities might lie in digital finance and maybe helping manage those loan risks.
That seems right. Digital banking and the whole fintech scene offer huge potential beyond payments, think neobanks, online lending platforms, insurtech, maybe regtech to help with compliance. There's a big need for better financing options for SMEs. Services around managing remittances and investment products for migrants. Microfinance is still important. And there's a small but growing private equity VC space. But yes, with rising NPLs, traditional bank lending might get tighter. So fintech solutions for better credit scoring, helping banks manage bad loans, or offering alternative funding routes could be very valuable. Also worth noting, Nepal being on the FATF gray list adds complexity. It means more international scrutiny on financial crime controls, requiring extra diligence from financial players.
Just quickly, what did the analysis say about education and health services?
In education, the focus is on reforms to improve quality and better align skills with what the job market needs, but growth has been slow, and many students still go abroad, suggesting gaps. Healthcare policy aims for better access and affordability, with a growing private sector role. So opportunities highlighted include professional training programs for skills needed in IT, tourism, construction, healthcare. EdTech platforms have potential. Private hospitals and clinics, especially in cities, maybe even medical tourism down the line, telemedicine and health tech, and pharmaceutical production or distribution.
Okay, let's talk about the startup scene. The report mentions Kathmandu as an emerging hub. What's the real story there?
It's definitely developing, yes, mostly in Kathmandu. The government has made some formal moves defining what a startup is legally, setting up a preferential loan scheme. It's about NPR 1 billion, offering loans up to NPR 2.5 million at a low 3% interest rate. There are also incubators and accelerators trying to help.
And we've seen some successes come out of that.
Yeah, the analysis points to some known names. Fintechs like Isiwa and Kalti, e-commerce and delivery like Sastadeal, Foodmandu, Upaya, EdTech like Programmis. So things are happening.
But the analysis also flags some pretty serious challenges, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This is crucial. The biggest issue seems to be funding beyond that initial government scheme, which is quite small in the grand scheme of things. The approval rate for those loans tells a story. Only 165 funded out of over 5,000 applications in FY 24-25. That's tiny.
Wow, less than 3.2%.
Exactly. There's just not enough angel investment or venture capital stepping in to fill that gap. Add to that the brain drain, stealing away talent, slow policy implementation, complex regulations, a somewhat risk-averse business culture, and political instability. It's tough.
So given those major hurdles, where do the opportunities lie for startups or maybe for businesses supporting them?
Well, for startups themselves, leveraging any initial support helps. But the bigger opportunity identified is focusing on solving real, specific, local problems. Waste management, like Khaleesi is doing. Logistics, like Upaya. Improving access to finance, education, healthcare for Nepalis. There's also potential in connecting with the Indian ecosystem for funding or mentorship through initiatives like the India-Nepal Startup Connect mentioned. And for others, opportunities exist in building the support system, better agile networks, mentoring programs, co-working spaces, especially outside the absolute center of Kathmandu.
But the bottom line is it's tough going.
The formal steps are positive, but yeah, that funding gap, the talent outflow, the operating environment, startups need really solid, sustainable models and probably need to look seriously at private or cross-border funding to scale.
Okay, let's zoom out again. The overall environment for doing business, investing, policy and regulation, what's the verdict from the analysis?
On paper, it looks okay. The government says it's pro-investment. You've got laws like FITA, PPPIA for public-private partnerships, the Industrial Enterprise Act. Investor guidelines exist. Budgets talk about reform, incentives. Nepal even improved in the World Bank's 2020, doing business ranking 94th, especially better on getting credit and cross-border trade.
But there's always a but, isn't there? What's the reality check?
The reality check from businesses, according to the analysis, is quite different. Despite the laws, they run into significant difficulties. Bureaucracy, administrative hurdles everywhere, policy inconsistency, rules changing, lack of effective implementation of things that are announced. There's a one-stop service center, the OSSC, but questions remain about how effective it really is in practice. That 2020 ranking improvement was good, but didn't fix underlying issues with, say, just starting a business or dealing with permits and taxes.
So patience and local knowledge are key.
Absolutely. Patience, local expertise, maybe professional help navigating the system.
You've mentioned infrastructure as a critical gap several times. Let's really dig into that based on the report.
It really is presented as perhaps the single biggest brake on the economy. Take energy. Despite all that hydro potential, energy security is a serious issue. Businesses, especially manufacturers, still face outages the report mentioned, up to 12+ hours sometimes, although Indian imports have helped recently, especially at night for industry. But domestic supply drops in the dry season, there are maintenance outages.
So it hits productivity, adds costs.
Directly. Businesses need reliable backup power. The long-term grid reliability just isn't proven yet.
And transport.
Roads are uneven, key projects suffer delays. We saw the TIA disruption. Big ideas like a Kathmandu metro face massive hurdles, cost, feasibility, coordination, land acquisition. Very little concrete progress seems to be happening. High transport costs because of bad roads hurt competitiveness.
Digital infrastructure.
Mobile broadband coverage is pretty good. But more advanced stuff like 5G rollout is lagging behind neighbors. There's uncertainty. Smart city plans are mostly on paper or small pilots hitting implementation walls.
So the big picture on infrastructure is?
The bottom line from the analysis is it's the Achilles heel. Unreliable energy, high transport costs, lagging digital. It holds everything back. Slow progress on major projects points to deeper issues. Businesses have to plan around these risks, backup power, smart logistics, but it also means there are opportunities in providing solutions, private power, better logistics, specialized communications, potentially through PPPs if the framework improves.
And lastly, on the environment, the FDI climate. Historically low, but commitments are up slightly.
That's the picture. Actual investment flowing in has been tiny for years compared to the potential or neighbors. There was a dip in 2022, a rise in 2023, and recently this uptick in announced commitments, the $430 million figure for FY25, often for smaller projects in IT, tourism, manufacturing. Hydropower used to attract the big money, now it's diversifying a bit. India's a major source.
But why don't the commitments translate into actual investment dollars flowing in? What's stopping them?
Investor feedback, as captured in the analysis, points to a familiar list. Policy inconsistency, the bureaucracy and admin barriers, those infrastructure gaps, political instability, regulatory hurdles, sometimes a lack of transparency, not feeling consulted enough. That gap between the commitment and the actual inflow is really telling. It suggests investors get interested, maybe sign initial papers, but then hitting the ground running, getting permits, transferring funds, dealing with the day-to-day operational reality, that's where they hit major roadblocks.
So navigating that implementation phase is the real challenge.
Exactly. And it creates a niche for advisory services that can help foreign investors manage that difficult transition from commitment to operation.
Okay, let's try and synthesize all of this. Based on the analysis, what emerge as the top, say, 7 promising business areas for 2025 to 2030?
Pulling it all together, the analysis points towards these niches. 1, ag tech and modernizing food supply chains, basically linking farms better to Kathmandu's demand. 2. Niche tourism and related infrastructure building on the recovery, future TIA capacity and diversification. 3. IT services and BPO, leveraging the talent and cost advantages while pushing for better infrastructure. 4. Renewable energy services, not just big hydro, but grid stability, efficiency, solar, EV infrastructure to tackle the reliability issue. 5. Affordable urban housing and proptech, addressing that huge demand affordability gap in the suburbs and using tech and real estate. 6. Professional and advanced training, filling the skills gaps in growth sectors like IT, hospitality, construction, healthcare. 7. And fintech, especially for financial inclusion, SME credit, digital payments, and remittance-linked products.
Does the analysis suggest any particular business models that might work well in Nepal's specific context?
Yes. Given the challenges, some models seem more suitable. Public-private partnerships, maybe focused on smaller, local infrastructure, fixes waste management for a specific area, reliable power for an industrial zone. Using technology to upgrade traditional sectors, ag tech, digitizing handicrafts or retail. Circular economy models, especially for urban waste. Franchising successful local brands. And community-based tourism that genuinely benefits locals.
And wrapping up the key risks and how businesses might approach mitigating them.
Okay, quick summary based on the report. Political policy instability. Hedge your bets with local partners, stay flexible, maybe focus on sectors with broad support, infrastructure deficits, energy transport, budget for backup power, optimize logistics, choose locations carefully, advocate for improvements, maybe even provide infra solutions yourself. Bureaucracy implementation gaps. Need dedicated resources, local expertise, use the OSSC for what it's worth, build relationships, financial sector risks. Monitor NPLs, keep your own finances strong, diversify funding, look beyond traditional banks, talent attraction retention, competitive pay benefits, training, good company culture, remote work if possible, partner with training institutes.
So bringing this deep dive to a close, the analysis paints Nepal, especially Kathmandu, as a place with real, tangible opportunities in specific areas driven by things like urbanization, digital potential, tourism's comeback.
But actually realizing the potential hinges completely on navigating these persistent, significant challenges. Infrastructure reliability and that gap between policy promises and reality seem to be the absolute crux of it.
Success in the coming years, 2025, 2030, looks like it will require focusing tightly on those niches, using digital tools smartly, really understanding urban needs, and riding the tourism wave. But it definitely demands patience, adapting locally, managing political uncertainty, actively mitigating infrastructure risks, and probably using innovative, sustainable models.
Yeah, the growth seems likely to come from services IT, specialized tourism plus hydropower finally coming online, and maybe modernizing agriculture. And Kathmandu. It's not just a market. Solving its problems really is key to unlocking potential nationally.
As a final thought for you, our listener, consider this. We talked a lot about remittances. They're this incredibly powerful force fueling consumption, providing stability, but, as the analysis suggests, maybe masking deeper issues.
What could genuinely shift Nepal's economic trajectory if those huge flows of money could be consistently channeled into productive investments within the country? And just how hard is that to actually achieve in the current environment? It feels like that question gets right to the heart of unlocking sustainable long-term growth for Nepal. Something to think about.